A 14-year-old boy held a rocket launcher he'd never fired, aimed at a Soviet tank, and waited to die. This wasn't a nightmare. This was Berlin, 1945, and that boy was one of Hitler's last soldiers. By this point, Germany had lost millions of men. So Hitler made a decision that shocked even his own generals. He would send children and grandfathers to fight the most powerful armies on earth. But why would anyone agree to this? To understand that answer, you have to go back to September 1944, when the Third Reich was already dying. The Wehrmacht was collapsing on two fronts, crushed between American tanks in the west and Soviet armies in the east. Millions of soldiers were dead, missing, or captured. Hitler's generals told him plainly there was nothing left to send, but Hitler refused to hear it. On September 25, 1944, he signed a secret decree that changed everything. Every German male between 16 and 60, untrained, unfit, unarmed, was suddenly declared a soldier by law. They called it the Volkssturm, the People's Storm, and its true purpose was darker than most people realize. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels announced it publicly, promising a violent burst of fanatic rage against the invaders. But behind those brave words was a truth. Goebbels never said out loud, Germany had already lost the war. What happened next inside the Nazi leadership was a power struggle nobody saw coming, and it changed everything. Martin Bormann wanted this new militia as his own private army, loyal to the Nazi party, not the military. Heinrich Himmler wanted it too, believing whoever controlled this force could control what remained of Germany itself. Hitler split the power between them, and that single decision would doom the Volkssturm before it even began. Two rival commanders. No coordination. No unified plan. Just chaos, dressed up as Germany's final line of defense. Now came the terrifying part. Deciding exactly who would be forced to fight and possibly die for a lost cause. Local Nazi officials called Gauleiters were ordered to register every eligible male in their town. No exceptions allowed. The youngest were Hitler Youth boys, some barely 17, roughly 550,000. Teenagers who had never held real weapons. The oldest were World War I veterans in their 50s and 60s, men the boys secretly mocked as grandpas. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with your grandfather. Both of you handed rifles, both of you told to hold the line. Most of them didn't even get real uniforms, just a black armband reading Deutscher Volkssturm over street clothes. And the weapons? What they received next would horrify any real soldier. Sent into modern mechanized warfare. Old bolt-action rifles from the last war. Captured foreign guns nobody knew how to maintain. Whatever could be scavenged. By January 1945, the entire militia possessed only 40,500 rifles and 2,900 machine guns for the whole country. There was no artillery, no real machine gun support, no supply chain, just improvisation, desperation, and false promises. Their one real weapon was the Panzerfaust, a cheap rocket launcher that could destroy a tank in seconds. It required almost no training, which was the only reason it worked at all in untrained, terrified hands. Training itself was almost a joke. Some units practiced with wooden sticks because actual rifles hadn't arrived yet. Days, not weeks, were spent preparing men and boys for combat against the most experienced armies in the world. General Gottlob Berger promised full combat readiness. By March 31, 1945, that promise was already a lie, because by then, the war would already be collapsing faster than anyone in Berlin was willing to admit. Historians later calculated that 1.23 million German soldiers died in just the final 4 months of the war. The Volkssturm absorbed heavy losses inside that number, though nobody ever recorded the exact human cost precisely. Desertion exploded, but tracking it became impossible as Germany's entire administrative system quietly fell apart around them. On the Western Front, facing Americans and British troops, something surprising happened that Nazi propaganda never predicted. Many Volkssturm units simply surrendered, refusing to die for a cause they privately knew was already finished. One American sergeant later admitted something chilling. An old man with a rifle could kill you just as easily. But in the East, facing the Red Army, the story turned into something far more brutal and unforgiving. Soviet soldiers had learned to hate resistance fighters since the horrors of Operation Barbarossa years earlier. They didn't see the Volkssturm as soldiers. They saw fanatics, and they showed almost no mercy in return. In East Prussia, Pomerania, and Silesia, boys and old men defended towns that were already completely lost causes. Some teenagers held bridges alone against Soviet tanks, armed with nothing but a Panzerfaust and pure terror. Others quietly vanished into forests and basements, hiding from an army they knew they could never actually stop. By February 1945, something was closing in on Berlin that no militia on earth could have prepared for. The Battle of Berlin was coming, and it would become the Volkssturm's final, most devastating chapter. Over 2.5 million Soviet troops, backed by 6,250 tanks, surrounded a city defended by children and pensioners. Inside Berlin, the real German army had almost vanished, leaving Volkssturm and Hitler Youth to fill impossible gaps. One unit, from Simonstadt, held 770 men, mostly World War I veterans, now factory workers in their 50s. Elsewhere, boys who should have been in classrooms fired rockets at tanks from bombed-out doorways and shattered windows. Meanwhile, deep underground, Hitler sat in his bunker, calling every retreat an act of unforgivable betrayal. He demanded fanatical resistance to the very last man, even as his own capital burned above him. Many older Volkssturm fighters, unwilling to die for nothing, began quietly searching for places to hide instead. The city itself was already rubble, years of bombing, weeks of artillery, and now house-to-house urban slaughter. Streets became killing zones where untrained boys faced Soviet veterans who had survived Stalingrad and years of brutal war. And in the chaos, something even darker unfolded, something Nazi propaganda never wanted the world to see. Some Volkssturm members were implicated in atrocities during the desperate collapse of the Eastern Front in January 1945, retreating forces near Königsberg forced concentration camp prisoners onto brutal death marches through freezing winter conditions. Some local commanders resisted these horrors and refused orders. Others didn't, revealing a deeply fractured moral reality. By late April 1945, Soviet troops fought street by street, building by building, straight toward Hitler's own bunker. The end was no longer a question of if, only a question of exactly how many hours remained. On April 30th, 1945, with Berlin nearly encircled completely, Adolf Hitler took his own life underground. 8 days later, on May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war the Volkssturm was built to somehow delay. The militia meant to inspire fanatic rage instead became a monument to a regime's complete and total exhaustion. Historian David Yelton later argued this wasn't just nihilism, it was a failed ideological gamble taken seriously. He wrote that its failure ultimately proved ordinary. Germans refused to choose pointless death over eventual, inevitable surrender. After the war, Allied forces treated captured Volkssturm members more gently, knowing most had never truly chosen this fight. They were farmers, teachers, factory workers, and schoolboys, ordinary people handed rifles and told to become soldiers. The Volkssturm never turned the war. It never delayed the end. It never became what Goebbels promised the world. Instead, it exposed the one truth the Nazi regime tried desperately to hide until its very final days. Germany hadn't run out of ideology. In 1945, it had run out of soldiers, time, and any real hope. When a nation starts arming children and grandfathers, it isn't preparing to win, it's preparing to disappear. The Volkssturm wasn't Hitler's final hope. It was proof, in human form, that hope had already died.